Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode in my game review series. And yes, before you ask, this is the video that took me 2 months to make. So, my first game review on Spinch was received very positively, so I decided to make another installment in the series. But this time we're doing something a little bit different. Instead of talking about only one game, I'm going to be talking about two fairly similar games, comparing them and ultimately deciding which one I prefer overall. So on one side we have the cult classic Undertale, a role-playing game developed independently by Toby Fox, and on the other side we have the newcomer, Omori, a surreal psychological horror game developed by OMOCAT. Like last time, I'm going to be ranking each game based on 4 categories, those being gameplay, design, story, and music. And obviously, since this is a versus between the two games, at the end of each category I'll tell you which game I think was superior in that category by awarding it a point. One last kind of important thing before we start though, it should be mentioned that Omori contains multiple depictions of topics like depression, anxiety, and suicide. So if you're not in a healthy headspace to hear about topics like this in the video, I just recommend skipping this one. So with all that out of the way, this is probably going to be a very long video, so let's just get into the first category. So even though both of these games are RPGs, I'm not going to really talk about the story in this segment, but rather just the raw gameplay of the two. Starting with Undertale, the majority of the game is spent exploring different areas of the world, collecting items to boost your overall power, talking to NPCs, and encountering enemies that appear throughout your adventure. Unsurprisingly, Omori also follows a lot of these RPG tropes, with one major difference, however: the combat system. See, while in Undertale, the player is only in control of one character the entire time. In Omori, however, most of the game is played as a party of 4, Omori and his 3 friends Aubrey, Kel, and Hero. This is the main difference between the gameplay in Undertale and Omori, since the fact that there are 4 main characters in Omori makes the combat system far different than Undertale's combat system. So here's where my first hot take comes in. I'm personally not a very big fan of the combat system in Undertale. Now don't get me wrong, I think the way the system works with how you don't have to fight every monster you see is brilliant within the context of the story, but in the context of pure gameplay, most of the combat just comes down to making guesses on which combination of acts will let you spare the monster. Obviously actually fighting them is more enjoyable, but not by much since it just boils down to timing your swings correctly and making sure your health doesn't run out by using items. Now obviously Undertale isn't trying to be that kind of game, since it's mainly the story that most players get enjoyment out of, but it is still possible to balance an interesting story with interesting gameplay. But to end on a positive side note for Undertale, I actually think this balance was achieved very well by its successor, Deltarune. Now Omori, on the other hand, actually has a surprisingly enjoyable combat system. Now when I first got the game, I knew it was very story-driven, so I definitely expected a fairly basic system, but instead, it's actually relatively complex, even though it does use some fairly standard combat system elements. So in combat, each member of your party has different stats, weapons, items, and attacks, and throughout the game, you can unlock and customize your 4 party members greatly. There's also a rock, paper, scissors system in place with emotions, where you can make your teammates or enemies feel certain emotions to change their stats. A simple system alone, but mixed with the rest of the combat elements, adds yet another layer of complexity. There's also smaller things that aid the combat system, such as follow-up attacks and juice skills. But overall, all of the intricacies of combat in Omori were very fun to learn, and definitely satisfying to master, with my only real complaint being that there's so much to learn so quickly that the task of understanding how combat works could be a little daunting at the beginning. The last thing I want to mention regarding the gameplay of both of these games is the side quests. Overall, they're both fairly good, though I found myself enjoying Omori's side content a little bit more, since there's a lot more stuff available to do from the main game than in Undertale. So since very little is different within the main gameplay between Omori and Undertale, besides their respective combat systems, and since I prefer both Omori's combat system and its side content to Undertale's, Omori gets the first point. Can't wait to see how the Undertale stands will react to that one. Anyways, on to design. So already I'll say that I'm a massive fan of the design in both of these games, simply because they use the pixel art style, which is just one of my favorite styles within video games. But there is still quite a bit to say about each individual game's design. Starting with Undertale again, firstly, I can say that the biggest positive with the designs in this game is the iconography. Honestly, it's super impressive how many unique and standout character designs Toby Fox managed to create within Undertale, while still having the design simple enough for you to understand the personality of a character simply just by looking at them. I think this is shown the best by character designs like Toriel and Alphys, who have a lot of their personality built into their design. I also love the character designs like Flowey and Asgore, which take the complete opposite approach and act completely different in-game than how you'd think they would given their design. Also, we haven't even gotten to the beautiful locations in this game. All of the pixel art is so well done, with some of my personal favorites being the mechanical and electronic feel of the core, and the mysterious gloomy waterfall, not to mention the excellent parallaxing in certain areas. Truly my only complaint with Undertale's design is that some of the pixel art looks a bit dated, but that's honestly just a bit of a nitpick. So with all the positives I have about Undertale's design, you'd think it would be leagues above Omori, but Omori actually puts up some very stiff competition. Now, although the pixel art in Omori is very good, and the locations are all very diverse and beautiful, I don't think the characters nor the backgrounds reach the same level of uniqueness or iconography as the designs in Undertale, which, to be fair, I would hardly expect any game as recent as Omori to accomplish. But we are forgetting about my personal favorite part of Omori's design, and that's just gotta be the hand-drawn illustrations within the game. Now, if there's anything that I think will eventually become iconic in Omori, it's the hand-drawn art. It's just so well done and unique, and contrasts so well with the traditional pixel art style. And it's also super cool seeing nearly the entire world of Omori in this alternate style throughout battles and cutscenes, since this style is the one that really sticks with you in my opinion. I honestly think that if Omori just used pixel art, the design would be one of the weakest parts of the game. But with this hand-drawn style, the design is leveled up to one of the strongest parts. I really can't give enough credit to the game devs, since I'd imagine that this has taken so long to make. So with all that being said, which game wins in the design category? This honestly took me a good while to decide while scripting this, but I think I'm gonna give it to Undertale. I think the design in it is just too consistently great for Omori to top, even if the hand-drawn style is amazing. So with that, the score is 1-1, and we move on to the category that we've all been waiting for. Alright, here we go. This will undoubtedly be the category that will take the longest to cover, so a few things before we properly start. Firstly, as I said in the beginning, Omori's story deals with topics like depression, anxiety, and suicide, so this is your last warning if you don't want to hear about that. Also, this is kinda obvious, but massive spoiler warning for both of these games. If you haven't played either and are still watching this for whatever reason, just go play them first. Okay, so let's start with Undertale, since its story is significantly less depressing than Omori's. In the game, you play as a human who has fallen down into the underground, a large area under the surface that houses the kingdom of monsters. The monsters in this world used to live on the surface, but after a war between the monsters and humans, monsters were banished underground and were sealed in by a magic barrier that can only be broken with the power of 7 human souls. On your journey, you meet new friends, face off against enemies, and discover all the secrets of the underground. I really have nothing but praise for the general story of Undertale. The characters are extremely funny and likable, but still have complex and interesting arcs. And like I said before, the locations are vibrant and interesting most of the time, and the overall plot is very satisfying to watch progress, no matter the ending you get. Which brings me to my next point about the story. So for those unaware, Undertale has 3 separate routes depending on how you play the game. These routes are the neutral route, the true pacifist route, and the genocide route, and all of these endings change the story wildly. The neutral route usually occurs on a player's first run-through of the game, since it only requires at least 1 monster to be killed. In the neutral ending, the king of the monsters is killed and you do manage to escape the underground, but without any of your monster friends, and they're left to wait for another human to fall down so they can break the barrier themselves. In the true pacifist route, often considered to lead to the good ending, if you go out of your way not to harm a single monster and discover a few secrets on your own, you're actually able to break the barrier yourself and let you and all the monsters free. Finally, in the genocide route, you must kill every single monster in every area, including those you befriended in previous runs of the game. This eventually leads to the destruction of the entire world of Undertale, and you must commit a true reset in order to replay the game properly. I personally really like this approach to storytelling, since it allows for a good amount of replayability that a lot of RPGs lack nowadays, and it also makes the player's choices very important, which really fits with the story since choice is one of Undertale's biggest themes. So overall, Undertale has a pretty fantastic story that nails most, if not all, elements required to make an interesting narrative. But now, we have to talk about Omori's story, which, for this to make any sense, I will have to spoil some major plot points in it. So in Omori, you start the game by waking up as the titular character in white space, an empty void of nothing besides a few of your belongings. After looking around a bit, you can eventually leave white space and enter headspace, a fantasy realm with a bunch of different locations to explore. In headspace, you meet your friends Aubrey, Kel, Hiro, and Basil, and your sister Marie. But eventually, Basil goes missing, and you spend the majority of the game trying to find him by traveling all around headspace. Now here's where we get into spoiler territory. Right after Basil goes missing, it's revealed that white space and headspace are not actually real, and that they're imaginary locations made up by the real protagonist of the game, Sunny. As the game progresses, you learn that in the real world, Sunny's sister, Marie, has committed suicide, and this caused Sunny's friend group to drift apart as time went by. Hiro went off to college, Kel made new friends through playing basketball, Aubrey changed drastically and became friends with a group of delinquents, and Basil became a shut-in. Sunny, who was affected the most, stayed inside of his house for 4 years, choosing to instead live in his own imaginary world through his alter ego, Omori. The game then splits into two different narratives. On one side, we have the Headspace plot, which involves Omori and his friends exploring the world of Headspace to try and find Basil, all taking place in Sunny's mind. And on the other side, we have the real world plot, where Sunny can choose to either reconnect with his friends in the real world and overcome his grief, or continue to stay in his room until he moves away into a new town. This also leads me into talking about the multiple endings in this game. Like Undertale, Omori also has different routes that lead to drastically different endings of the game. Unlike Undertale, however, Omori only has two major routes that split at one major point of the story. The first of these routes is known as the Omori route, where Sunny keeps the door shut and continues to live as a hikikomori until he moves away, with his grief over Marie's death staying with him for the rest of his life. The other route is known as the Sunny route, which has a lot more detail to it. In it, Sunny does open the door for Kel, and he spends his last few days in town reconnecting with all of his friends. However, this route leads to the biggest spoiler and quite possibly the most heartbreaking revelation of the entire game. On the final day before Sunny moves, you as the player learn the truth about Marie's death. During a heated argument between Sunny and Marie, Sunny pushed Marie down the stairs, unintentionally killing her. After a few vain attempts to save her, Sunny breaks down. Then Basil, who was at Sunny's house during the accident, suggests that they cover up her death as a suicide, so they hang her body on a tree in the backyard. To say this experience traumatized the two kids would be an understatement. And with this knowledge, it becomes clear that Sunny's grief is actually guilt over the accident that led to his sister's death. And leaving his house after all this time and reconnecting with his friends has caused his repressed memories to flood back into his mind, which leads to a final confrontation with Omori, where he either fully overcomes his guilt and tells his other friends the truth, or he inevitably succumbs to it and is taken over by Omori. So, now that both stories have been explained, it's time to find out which game gets the point for the category. And although it's pretty close, given how I've described both of these games as stories, I think you can imagine which gets the point for me. Now, as I said, Undertale has a really great and interesting story, with a fair share of very emotional moments. But on my first playthrough of Omori, I started tearing up by the end of it. The story about a boy overcoming his guilt over the tragic death of his sister, an event that caused his lifelong friends to drift apart and all deal with their own bouts of grief, is just such a brilliant and devastating narrative to watch unfold. While playing the game, you really become connected to the characters and feel awful for them as you learn the truth about the story, especially Sunny. It's honestly amazing how much emotion can be pulled from this character with nearly no dialogue from him, and simply just using haunting and depressing imagery. The visual storytelling in this game in general is just phenomenal. Honestly, I'm not a good enough scriptwriter to put into words how impressed I was with Omori when I played it, and its story alone makes me hope that one day it does reach the success of Undertale, since I believe it truly deserves it. So yeah, that's a lot to take in, I know. And I'm sorry if I didn't explain the plots of either game very well, but there are actually some other videos you can watch that go into much greater detail about Undertale and Omori. I've linked them in the description below. But anyways, after 2 weeks of writing this section of the script, we can finally move on to the next category. So this will be a pretty short segment of the video, in contrast to the story segment. Plus the winner of this category is pretty obvious, I think. So we're gonna switch it up and talk about Omori first this time. Simply put, I think Omori's soundtrack is really solid. Firstly, there are some absolute bangers on the OST, like Jawbreaker, You Are Wrong Go Back, My Time, and especially World's End to Valentine, that all rival some of Undertale's best songs. Also, the majority of the shorter sound effect tracks, while not very interesting, are usually pretty catchy and do fit the tone of whatever part of the game they take place in. But I can't mention Omori's music without mentioning my personal favorite song on the soundtrack, Duet. Although I do consider it my favorite mainly because it's used in the scene that made me tear up when first playing through the game. But it's still a very good piece of music. Now with all that being said, unfortunately Omori still does not come anywhere close to the level of Undertale's soundtrack. I've really had nothing but very high praise for everything in Undertale so far, and I still think that its soundtrack is far and away the best part about the game. It's honestly rare that you get a soundtrack for a video game so good that it transcends the game itself. Like, I bet that there's tons of people that can name multiple songs on the OST that haven't even played the game. It's insane. Ghost Fight, Heartache, Bone Trazzle, Dummy, Spear of Justice, Metal Crusher, Spider Dance, Core, Death by Glamour, Asgore, Your Best Nightmare, Hopes and Dreams, Save the World, His Theme, Battle Against a True Hero, and Power of Neo are all absolutely iconic, not to mention they all slap. Then you've got some musically stunning tracks like Fallen Down, Snowy, It's Raining Somewhere Else, the title track, and Reunited to name a few. Truly some of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard in an OST. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention it before, but there is this one other song I really like on the OST. We're not going to name the name of it because reasons. Honestly, I would put Undertale's soundtrack as one of my top 3 favorite video game soundtracks of all time. And even though Omori's got some great stuff in it, it can't for a second beat Undertale's soundtrack. Undertale obviously gets the point for the music category. So, after all of the categories have been discussed, it's a tie. I know it's a little anticlimactic if you really cared about the final score, but honestly, I think this score perfectly sums up which game I prefer. I love both Undertale and Omori for what they are, but that's not to say that they have the same strengths and weaknesses. Like I went over before, I think Undertale has some masterful design and music, whereas Omori shines more with its interesting gameplay and incredible story. So here's how I'll sum up my final thoughts on both games in one sentence. Go play both of them. They're both fantastic. So we've officially made it to the end of what will most likely be my biggest project yet. Seriously, covering one game already takes long enough for me, but to cover 2 at a time and make in-depth comparisons between them takes quite a bit, as evidenced by the 2 to 3 months that it's been since I've uploaded a video. All that's to say though, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for semi-often videos from me. And while you're at it, check out my first game review on my channel, if you want to see something similar to this. Finally, I want to encourage everyone one last time to play these 2 games if you haven't yet. For the price that they both are, they're incredible. And that is it. Thank you for watching.